I'm really excited about this edition of the Ponderers because this is our place for really powerful career conversations that are going to hopefully shift the dial a little bit on what takes place in Australia in schools. And I get to invite some amazing people to come and talk to me about all the things that they're doing in this space and share their wisdom. And today I'm joined by Nick Humphreys, who is Chief Strategy Officer at the Beacon Foundation. And he really leads the organisation's long-term strategic planning and innovation agenda, which sounds very impressive. And Nick is a very impressive guy. And he's got just this wealth of experience working within our sector, but also supporting young people who need it most and working with those who are disadvantaged. So, Nick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Lucy. Very kind introduction. Hi, everybody who's watching and listening on.
I wondered if you could just take me back right to the beginning and talk to me about what you were like at school, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you thought you would be when you left school.
Yeah, sure. And I've got a big smile on my face with this question because it's I don't know how often, maybe once a year, once every year and a half or something like that. For some reason, I have a couple of my primary school reports still in a box somewhere, and they come out, and my wife and children laugh at the comments that were left in my report. I actually said, could she find one and send a photo through so I could read it to you? But I was, a pretty good student, like reasonably good sort of academically, but I was a dreamer. I was a kid in grade 3, 4, 5 who was looking out the window, thinking about climbing up trees or playing football or something else that my mind was getting carried away with. Either that or I was, drawing out a beautifully colored 3D. I'm not sure if it was a thing for you, but back in the 80s for me, those the bubble writing headings
Oh,
on
yeah.
my assignments. So the other students would be doing their thing and it would come to the end of the class and I'd have this beautifully 3D kind of bubbly with a bit of a reflection on the top of the R or something like that done with absolutely no writing whatsoever. So I think my primary school report comments, which unfortunately in Tasmania, I'm not sure if it is the same in other states. So we don't actually get comments, teacher comments, right? We get the report results for our students. I've got 3 kids, and we don't get the comments, which is where I think a lot of the sort of the context about who is the human, who's showing up in your classroom comes through. Mine were, Nick has a lot of potential if he would only concentrate a little bit more, or something like that, Lucy. So a dreamer and a bit of a creative. Like I had a bit of artistic talent, and so I would lean into that as opposed to the work that I was meant to be completing.
I love that. And I agree because, I know you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing, but you were doing something that was very important to you. And that's what matters. And you were cultivating those skills instead.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, hopefully there is a little bit of we can underscore it when
Get
I
into
come to
that.
my role
Okay.
and my skill set a little bit, maybe.
Did you have when you were like in year 10-ish, did you have any dreams about what you wanted to do? I mean, I wanted to be a marine biologist so that I could work with the dolphins like pretty much every other woman my age. Did you have anything
Mm.
like that?
Mm, I feel like, sport was pretty prominent for me through my childhood. I was a pretty good junior Aussie rules player. And so I think, and you and I have had conversations about career sort of guidance and exploration and where young people best fit and things like that. I feel like on reflection, I was a classic case of areas of interest kind of
Okay.
really heavily guiding the university pathway in my circumstance that I followed, as opposed to maybe a little bit of a deeper sort of what are the skill sets, what are the values, how do you problem solve and where are you best sort of suited for roles. So anyway, I think it was a professional AFL player, was definitely at the top of my list. And then otherwise it was something to do with sport. And so I inevitably, I went through and studied a human movement sports science degree at university at Ballarat. I grew up in Victoria. So it was that pathway. It was a pathway of interest rather than anything else necessarily.
No, I like that. And it's funny because that's often when I'm having counseling conversations with young people, that's what I really encourage them to do is to be like, just follow an area
Mhm.
of interest. Don't worry about having a job title in your head. Just go after that interest area and have broad options. I love it. Okay. So your current title is Chief Strategy Officer, which sounds very impressive, but not many young people would know what that exists or would be
Mhm.
familiar with that title. Can you just talk us a little bit, like explain what it is and then talk us about how you got into this specific role?
Yeah, sure. Sort of head of strategy is what I normally say, as opposed to the full title. It sounds maybe less pretentious, but it's really about looking forward. It's really about having sort of that supporting the organization to have a vision about what we want to do more of, how we're going to best achieve our mission, which is helping young people confidently transition from education to employment, and yeah, and guiding the organization towards that, both externally and also internally. But yeah, how I got here, a little bit sort of winding it back a little bit. Like I said, I studied sports science as a university degree, and then traveled overseas and worked a little bit in that sports science field, but actually only very briefly as far as my career was concerned. And I always had, probably from late teenage years, a draw towards social justice, sort of welfare space for whatever reason. And so by the time I sort of started my career proper back in Australia, sort of mid-20s, I moved into the nonprofit space and worked across welfare and a lot in that youth sort of employment readiness space, up in New South Wales primarily, before relocating down to Tasmania. Wife and I and the kids, right on the commencement of COVID, I think I've told you the story, Lucy, bought a caravan and tried to travel around Australia and didn't get very far with borders being closed. And then ended up settling in Tasmania. And that was over about 5 years ago now, just over 5 years ago. And Beacon was the first employer who I secured employment with. And so over the last 5 years, I've been fortunate enough to move into different roles within the organization. Probably the two key things that I can identify as to why, or the roles that I've had around program design, for example, but also some operational capacity within the organization, and that have, make me quite suited to the strategic role that I'm in, is a combination of creativity, like I mentioned at primary school, creativity in my sort of problem solving, in my dreaming about, oh, how might we solve this problem, but then also recently analytical sort of systems thinking about then, or how do we go and actually realize this or deploy this, and what does this look like pragmatically? So it's probably those two areas of strengths or skills that I think make me pretty good in that strategy space. The combination of that imaginative, creative, and also that sort of analytical systems thinking about the execution of strategy.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because there are two skill sets that you have to have for doing strategy. You have to be able to dream, you have to be able to think big and hypothesize what might come, but then you also have to have
Mm,
the structure to back that up. But they're also things that we don't necessarily teach or encourage or prioritize at a school level. We're thinking in discrete years and terms. We're not telling young people to work on a project that will continue next year or the year after.
mm.
I know that you said at the start that you sort of were a bit, a bit lost at school, maybe a bit of a daydreamer, but maybe that's, an explanation of why, is because those skills aren't necessarily visible in our school system as it is.
I was just going to make one comment to that. I think I've reflected, I think maybe with our 16-year-old, about that difference. And I think it's a really important one between, a lot of the time, the time frame for task completion at school
Mhm.
is not often reflective of timeframes that are allowed for task completion in the world of work,
Yeah.
and particularly in a role like mine, where it's, you're right, you can have 6 months or even 18 months is your time frame to be working through and thinking deeply and collaborating with others. Whereas at school, it doesn't look anything like that most of the time. Yeah, I think there's something important there to be able to allow students that space and time to be able to dig deep into things.
Yeah, we'll probably come back to that. I would suggest. I wanted to move on and talk a little bit about your actual work and what that looks like. And I know that the Beacon Foundation is this incredible institution in Tasmania. Almost everyone I speak to in Tasmania knows exactly who you are. But even though you deliver programs on the mainland or and elsewhere, other people might not know that much about the foundation. So could you just kind of explain really quickly or give a bit of context around the foundation itself and how it fits in?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like you said, Beacon Foundation is sort of born and bred in Tasmania. So head office is down in Hobart, and founders and current CEO Scott are also Tasmanians. So organization's been around for a bit over 35 years, so pretty well established. And like you said, we've sort of had, depending on funding and things like that, different breadth of presence on the mainland, still deliver programs in sort of Southeast Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, a bit of South Australia, and sort of some clustering in WA when we get the chance to. So we work as effectively a sort of an intermediary, if you like, delivering career readiness and early employment experiences for high school students. In schools, public schools with an ICSIA below 1,000 is our target audience. So more disadvantaged, if you like, or lower socioeconomic on average public school students, to be able to give them those opportunities they might be missing out on. Collaborating really closely with, obviously, educators in the school, making sure that we're complementing the efforts that are already underway in any given school, between leadership and between the career educators who are driving careers experiences for their students, and being an intermediary between those schools and those students and the community or industry and employers that sit around that school, a lot of the work is around facilitating at different stages at year 7, 8, year 9, 10, year 11 and 12. So those key stages of high school, age appropriate and sort of stage appropriate or developmentally appropriate career readiness activities and experiences. And the vast majority, not all of them, but the vast majority are Beacon staff member facilitated content. Some of it we coordinate and a teacher or maybe the industry partner will be present whilst the experience is running, but the vast majority is Beacon facilitated content and experiences.
Mm. Feel like you maybe undersold a little the intermediary role that you play, because I like as an observer and sort of a collaborator with Beacon, I noticed that that's one of the things that there are lots of different organizations that sit as that kind of middle space in between schools and industry, and they take different approaches to that. We see quite a few of them around the place. But I quite like
Mm-hmm.
how Beacon, one of the things I've always admired is that you find the positives for the industry and for those organizations as well as for the schools and the students. So it's like everyone is winning as you're moving towards those goals. And I really like that about Beacon. Some of your programs, you said 35 years, which is nuts to me. That's such a
Mm.
long period of time. What can you talk me through some of your favorite programs, and why is it your favorite? Why do you like delivering them that way?
It's obviously a hard one. We've got a suite of programs that we deliver. I had those kind of thoughts of, choosing your favorite child kind of thing. Not quite like that, but look, it'd be remiss of me not to mention our Polish program. And maybe some people on the call or who watch this later will recognize that maybe if they're familiar with Beacon, because it certainly predates my time with the organization. There's a series of three, we call them high impact programs. Prepare is focused around that year 7, 8 age group. Polish is at the 9, 10 age group, and then Perform is in that 11 and 12 or targeted that 11 and 12 space. And I think Polish has been a real sort of flagship program for the organization because it sits in that sweet spot of transition. And within the program, it addresses some sort of key outcome or sort of career confidence based elements like first impressions. So we walk through the students, so what are first impressions and how to make a good first impression, some of those classical kind of elements. What are transferable skills, and help them go through a couple of exercises to identify their transferable skills and understand that they actually have some value to offer in what they do at home or at school and maybe at work or in hobbies. And then support them to articulate those transferable skills in preparation for a mock interview with real, new adults that they're engaging with, that we bring in from as volunteers from industry to be able to sit in those mock interviews. So I think Polish has been in demand for so many years from schools, and is our most prevalently delivered program across the country because of those things. It sits in that sweet spot of transition before either sort of college or university subjects or apprenticeship sort of transition, if that's the case, and it hits on those big ticket items. So that one certainly has stayed the test of time for sure for Beacon. I'll quickly say though, really excited about, we've got a year 8 pilot program in partnership with the department down here in Tasmania that's being piloted this term and term 4 in 2026. So really keen to see how that lands. And of course, our Beacon Career Program that you're familiar with, Lucy, is a longer form program that we piloted a couple of years ago now, but it's a 10-week program. So it's a bit of a culmination of everything that we know through practice wisdom, but also a lot of theory and frameworks that are brought into it. The thing I love about that one is that it really doubles down on the personal alignment of career exploration for the students who are participating in that program. And it's the same cohort of young people who participate from week 1 through to week 10, where we celebrate their experience. So that personal alignment piece, I think, is what I really love about the Beacon Career Program, because it has time to be able to allow the students to explore that.
I love how you didn't want to choose a favorite child, and so you kind of ended up talking about all of them.
Yeah, you said one. I think I mentioned 3, but yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. Quick question that wasn't in the ones that I sent to you before we move on. Your Polish program comes after Prepare, I think is the
Mhm,
junior one.
mhm.
Do you notice, yes or no, do you notice that the students who've gone through the earlier, younger program do better when they come to Polish?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, yeah, and slightly longer than yes or no. The Prepare is more about broadening their awareness of what opportunities might be available to them, and particularly things like sort of debusting some or demystifying some stereotypes that might be limiting their belief of what might actually be available to them. And so when you're then building the polish experience upon a broader awareness of the opportunities available, then you're able to sort of capitalize on that program in the year 7 and 8 space.
Yeah. And I think a really important observation is more schools are looking to create programs in those earlier years, or people are thinking about how can we do things in earlier years. And every time we have evidence that those early years do prepare them for what comes later, I think that's really powerful. So thanks for that sneaky little question. So I also wanted to know, you're a not-for-profit and you work alongside schools, in schools and with industry. And can you just explain a little bit about how that works and what your relationships are like with your schools? Because I know you do have some really strong relationships with the schools that you've been working with for a while.
Yeah, for sure. There's commonalities across, but I'll quickly say that Tasmania looks a little bit different to the rest of the country because we've got a statewide government contract with DSIT down here, the Department of Education. So we're available to deliver programs through work-based learning services to all public high schools in Tasmania. We're actively delivering, I think, to 62 or so of the 64, for example.
Yep. Wow.
So we've got a really nice broad reach and availability. It's government funded through our grant to be able to deliver that. So free delivery through to schools of those experiences. And there's sort of a variety of different either incursions or excursion based experiences that we provide. Yeah, look, we intentionally, and maybe it's to your comment before about maybe underselling the intermediary side of things. Our field staff are amazing, and it's not a sort of a one size fits all and a set and forget kind of situation. While we have a suite of set programs or offerings that we provide, they're really contextualized. They're really sort of place-based and contextualized. Our staff take into consideration, we meet with our schools at the start of every year, at the end of the year, preceding the following year. We survey year 9 students or 8 students and ask them, get an understanding of what are their interests, what industry areas might they focus on, so that we can contextualize the engagement of industry for work placements, but also volunteers who we bring into the specific schools, so that the conversations are contextualized, at least themed around student interest areas. So there's a lot of work that does go into making sure that, like I said, they're contextualized, they're really well thought through, they complement the existing program delivery within the school and don't compete with what's being delivered. I think also there's a pragmatism to the way Beacon work, which is what I've loved, and it pre-existed me. What I love about the organization, we have an aspirational mission and so on, but we really want to see meaningful activities being undertaken, and primarily for our core beneficiary, which is the young person, right? So that continuity and contextualizing their experiences is really central to what we're doing, and then making it meaningful for industry and for volunteers and others who participate. So I'm not sure if that's answered your question, but yes, we try to have real partnerships with our schools, as opposed to coming in and then transactionally and then stepping out and saying farewell. Maybe one other thing I'll mention, if it's sort of part of the response, is our funding generally comes through 3 different sort of streams. So we either have corporate funders who support our program delivery to schools. We don't currently have a school revenue or a school fee model. So none of our schools pay for the programs that are delivered, whether it's Tasmania or on the mainland, and they are funded by either philanthropic funding, corporate partnerships, or state government contracts, for example.
I think it's always interesting seeing how different systems find these local sort of solutions to problems, and it seems like a really great relationship, like a durable, robust relationship that you've got down there. And also, like, I always find it fascinating to understand how people sustain themselves and how organizations can continue to do the work that it is that you're trying to do. So thank you for that. I'd like to we've got about 10 minutes left, and I always just like to get the observations of our guests, because you've been around the space for such a long period of time. You have the ability to take, and you're a strategist, so you have the ability to take this kind of higher level approach. I wondered if you could just speak for a minute about the main barriers that you see for young people that you work with, and if you think they're changing, particularly in light of, this conversation we've been having over the last sort of year or two about AI and how it's disrupting the workforce. So sorry to recap. So what are the main barriers you're seeing for young people, and do you think they're changing?
Yes, I think they're changing. Some of them are changing and some of them are pretty stable, sort of, unfortunately. And you know very well, and most of the listeners, I'm sure, there's a long list of different things that I could mention. So, in no particular order, certainly, and maybe it's a little bit generic, but access to opportunity. Again, I'm talking about, and I'm sort of biased or focused on students who are maybe more disadvantaged or lower socioeconomic, who may not have the family network to be able to provide these opportunities. Yeah, access to opportunity is definitely a big one, and we know statistically, and evidence shows that not surprisingly, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have less opportunity to be able to experience meaningful sort of career readiness activities and experiences through their schooling. In line with that, or linked to that, certainly is that social mobility or social capital. Again, and I probably can't state the study, but it might have been an OECD research paper that came through that shows even lower socioeconomic young people with higher academic performance are still less advantaged than lower academic performing, higher socioeconomic peers, and that's obviously sort of a great tragedy to society that we're living in, and for whatever Beacon's part is to play in that, we're trying to level that field to some degree. And I think it is the OECD that I'm paraphrasing when I say that proxy social capital is what we're offering about. And that's why in pretty much every one of our activities that we deliver, we have volunteers from industry coming in to create that social capital, to create a manufactured but hopefully meaningful network to be able to produce some social capital and mobility that they might not have otherwise in their personal networks, because it's so powerful for them to be able to feel the confidence of having people they can trust and people they can turn to and call to navigate those next steps. And maybe the last one is one that is definitely emerging, and we've seen it over the last sort of year or so in particular, I think, and maybe it still has its sort of calling signs back in COVID, but is that sense of belonging, or a losing sense of belonging and sense of school relevance for young people, and particularly around that year 8 sort of stage. There's a lot of evidence, and I think just a couple of days ago, maybe, or just recently, there was an OECD paper that came out speaking to exactly this, around a loss of a sense of belonging and sense of relevance of school. And that's actually one of the things that our the year 8 program that I mentioned earlier, that's being piloted down here with DSIP, is a 3-session program. And it's really trying to address that sense of belonging and the sense of relevance of learning, and linking it to where they might want to see themselves in the future, because we're definitely seeing that that's a stage of disengagement.
It's interesting that, but everything that you're saying rings true to me, particularly that social capital. But, as you're speaking, I'm thinking that social capital is important in that, year 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 kind of phase, but that sense of belonging has to come first. That
Yeah,
understanding of why they're at school has to come first, so that then they can go, oh, I need to actually build my social capital. And, it's once again tying it into, we need a longer approach to career education, and in order to address those barriers.
yeah,
Um,
certainly.
I'm I wanted to ask, you do have this ability, or in your role, to sort of step back a little bit and take more of a bird's eye view, which is something that a lot of us don't have the ability to do. We're sort of in the trenches all
Mm.
day long. I wanted to ask if you think there are enough people, and not necessarily people working in schools, but enough people in the system who are stepping back to take this broader picture and that higher view of what's happening, or do you think we need more people to actually take that step and sort of try and understand this on a larger scale?
Mm. It's a tricky one to answer, because I know that there are organizations sort of, and or individuals, and maybe state departments, that are looking at different components of this challenge, which is, and this challenge, I guess I'm saying, young people confidently moving into adulthood, and adulthood is probably involving gainful employment, hopefully. So there's international research bodies like the Career Readiness Project at the OECD. There's practitioners like yourself who are always researching and staying sort of current across contemporary themes, and speaking about solutions in this space. And you mentioned, there are definitely leaders in schools, in leadership, and also in career education within schools that are driving this. I think, or I hope, what Beacon is doing is adding. We haven't spoken about. We formalized an innovation lab within Beacon to really look at I used the word pragmatic before, a pragmatic lens, to put a pragmatic lens over some of the research theoretically that is, or in academically, that is being conducted, and try to apply that to practice, pilot it, put it in front of young people, test it and evaluate it, compare it back against the theory and the academia, to see, did this actually work on the ground, and what might this look like operationally? How do we coordinate this and make it a practical intervention for schools to be able to deploy for students and students' experience? So maybe short answer is no, maybe not enough people are doing it in this space, or there are people, but they're fragmented.
Mm.
So maybe what I would love to see is a more of a collaborative approach to solving this multifaceted challenge of young people confidently moving into the world of work.
Yeah, I would agree. And I agree, you mentioned innovation, and I'm just going to ask you a question about that in a second, but I think we are seeing some innovative approaches, and I'm really excited by the approach Beacon's taking in standing up the innovation lab to try to find more innovative approaches, because we know some things are working, and some things are not working. So like, let's take that systematic approach to kind of working through those things. Some of the governments have been doing that as well. It's been nice to see like the WA government with their career taster program over the last few
Yep.
years. Some of the really innovative things happening in Victoria as well. So it's nice to see other people taking innovation, but I really hope that's something that continues to grow and continues to come about. And that's why I'm so grateful, or I guess glad, that Beacon's doing that as well. We've just got time for one
Hmm.
final quick question, and I'm going to change it a little bit. I wanted to ask you, if there was one innovation that you could snap your fingers and bring to life in our space, whether that's social capital or career development or whatever that is, what would
Mm.
that innovation look like?
Oh, I had an answer prepared for your
No,
other question.
sorry, cut yourself.
um,
If you could pick one thing from the innovation lab to move forward or to make real today, what would
mm,
it be?
Look, I think then, without spending 10 minutes ruminating over the answer, I think it would have to be a primary school,
Yeah.
facing offering, to be honest, Lucy. It's something that Beacon hasn't yet delved into. We're looking at, we've already started to sort of research and develop some different concepts that might fit into that space. To our comments that we've just had on the call is, I think career education needs to be incorporated into the school experience sort of almost as early as possible. And of course, age appropriately, but to be able to build upon a self-awareness and a self-confidence and an expanded understanding or appreciation for what might be possible for me as a grade 3, 4, 5-year-old student, to be able to dream about what's possible within that now expanded scope of what might be available to me, I think is incredibly powerful to then layer the early, mid, and late high school experiences upon. Of course, the narrowing of possibilities just means you've got a smaller foundation to be able to build confidence upon later in their high school years. So yeah, so that's my answer to if there was an innovative approach or something that we could deploy out of the innovation lab tomorrow, it would be something that sits into that primary school space.
I'm so glad you said that, because primary school education, career education is so important. And
Mm.
I had a suspicion that might be the thing you came up with, but
Yeah, yeah,
so I'm glad
yeah.
that
Well,
I'm glad that's what it was.
yeah.
And I think that's a really lovely spot to leave the conversation today. I'm so grateful, Nick, for your time and for coming along and sharing all your wisdom.
Our pleasure. It's always lovely to talk to you, Lucy.